The HX Collective explores the human experience through three main channels of life: work, relationships, and self. With raw, authentic conversations, the podcast investigates how challenges can become powerful teachers, leading to personal growth and deeper connections. Rooted in humanity-centered design, each episode reflects a commitment to doing good and doing well, featuring diverse voices and generational perspectives. Expect gripping stories of struggle and success, with thought-provoking discussions and concrete tools and tactics that encourage you to rethink your relationship with distress, helping you to establish your full human experience. This is the HX Collective channel. Hello, friends. So excited that you're with us today, and I cannot wait for you to meet my dear friend, my mentor, my executive coach, my collaborator in all things leadership in life, Lisa Slayton. Today is a conversation about elevating the human experience to really lift and amplify human flourishing, and we're going to do it through the lens of uncertainty. Friends, you're in for a real treat today. In addition to getting to know Lisa Slayton as a person, you are going to have a chance to hear about her esteemed writing and the work that she's been engaging for the past year as one of the co-authors for Life in Flux. You need to see this book. This book must be in your library, as I'm making it big and not necessarily great with the camera. But I can tell you that this is chock full of tremendous insights on how to navigate what it means to have leadership, how to be grounded in times of uncertainty. And notwithstanding, we are recording this at the end of 2025. I think most of us can understand by the time we're listening to this. I suspect that the wisdom that Lisa is going to share and the dialogue we're going to have will have a timelessness of impact and effectiveness. So Lisa, welcome to the podcast. The HX Collective is so excited to have your voice and to have your experience with us. And I can't wait for our audience to learn a bit more about your journey to this book, but really a much bigger piece of your life's work in the executive consulting and advisory and coaching that you do. So before we get started, do you mind giving us a little bit of a deeper dive in your background and really how we ended up in this space as a book author?
Yeah, thanks, Deb. It's delightful to be here, and I'm very thrilled to be part of this. I don't know what we're calling it, the reconstitution of the HX Collective for this season for leaders in all arenas, really. You and I met, 17 years ago.
Crazy
I know
time.
it's hard to believe, right? It's been that long, and that was in a time I was already immersed in this work, but I would say the 17 years that have passed have been deep learning for me on multiple levels, both personally as a leader and also in the work that I do with others. I spent 15 years in retail merchandising on the business side of the world and then stayed home. I have one 30-year-old adult child. It's about to be 31, which I find a little mind-boggling. I'm not that old. I guess I am. Anyway, and so I stayed home for a few years when Rain was young, and then went back into the workforce as they went into college or into elementary school and started being in school full time. And I got captivated by the study of leadership and human dynamics, relationship dynamics. I, like many of us, grew up in a very dysfunctional family, and I had done a fair amount of therapy up to this point. But really understanding a bigger picture of human systems and how we interact with one another, and both through a therapeutic lens and through a systems thinking lens, became very integral to how I went about my work. And we launched a cohort. I worked for an organization for about 14 years called the Pittsburgh Leadership Foundation. And we launched a cohort program in the mid-aughts, maybe 2006 or 7, called the Leaders Collaborative. And really what the operating premise that we started with, which I still hold strongly to today, is that leadership begins with who you are, not what you do, right? And so who are you is the question. And I think that if I had to name one question that has guided my work for many, many years, that's the question. And we live in a culture that encourages us to put on lots of masks and ways of being to meet the needs of others, and we don't necessarily do the deeper, harder work of that, what we call internal excavation, which is really what Life in Flux is all about.
As we sort of look at that journey that you've been on personally, I can say with confidence and leading to present day with Tamim Partners is that one of my favorite things about your perspective is that through line around human connectedness and relationships. I also
Mhm.
think so much of what you bring to the work that you do, and whether it's in a formal engagement as your client or simply being a person who's a collaborator and friend, you are a lifelong learner. And I
Mhm.
think the ability to be such an aggregator of great insights and thought leadership and how to bring that together to bring original perspective together, there's something to be said about how beneficial it is for you to have the mechanism of how you absorb and engage in the world to then come to those like critical questions, those critical points of reflection, and then the capacities then to help people respond from a place of abundance, from a place of empowerment, from a place of self-control. And so, as we think about the work that you're doing in Tamim Partners and then coming to this space to say, all right, Michaela and I, we've got a perspective and a point of view, and we got to put something in the world that doesn't yet exist. And so maybe you can give us a little bit more on the bridge then. So, how do
Sure.
you move into this space of like, how does life in flux get born? And frankly, how does one find the time to write a book? Like,
Oh my goodness.
I'm just going to stand in awe of that in and of itself, and particularly a book that is so good as the one that you've written. So, tell us a little bit about,
Thanks.
kind of that jumping on spot.
Yeah. So Michaela and I have been friends for a number of years now. I met her when I was still at Pittsburgh Leadership Foundation. She is the executive director of the Max Dupree Center for Leadership that's housed at Fuller Seminary. And for those of you who may, the name Max Dupree may be meaningful for you, Max built and developed and took the company Herman Miller to astronomical proportions in the furnishings business, and iconic pieces that we all know and love can be attributed to Herman Miller. And Max was a remarkable leader, and he believed deeply in the power of relationships as part of leading organizations and people well. And so Michaela and I, she's a researcher. She's what's sometimes, what not sometimes, is called a practical theologian. So she has both the theoretical and intellectual, but she also is very much a practitioner. And I put myself firmly in the practitioner camp. Like I love research, and I can leverage the crap out of other people's research for good. As you said, I love to take things and integrate them and bring them together. But I'm not trained, nor do I want to be a researcher. And Michaela's done some research in her own work at the Dupree Center around what makes good leaders great, particularly in the marketplace. And we can reference that further down in the conversation. So she wrote a book that came out about 5 years ago called Make Work Matter, which I commend to you. A very good book on really finding, our own agency and being able to bring meaning to our everyday work. Right. So that's the premise of the book, and lots of very practical tools. And she called me. We had lots of conversations about lots of things, as you and I have had over the years, Deb. And she said, I'm starting to think about my next book. And she had a 2-book contract. She said, I'm starting to think about my next book, and I would you be a thinking partner with me? And I said, sure. So we scheduled a call and got on, and we started talking. And she was like outlining what she wanted this book to be about. And I said to her, without thinking about it really, after I'd listened for a bit, oh, if you're writing that book, I want to write it with you. And then I was like, did I
What did I
just say
just
that
do?
out loud? And she's like, really? And I'm like, I don't know, but I don't know. Think about it. So she went away and thought about it and came back and said, all right, well, before we make that commitment, let's see if we can actually work together. And I said, great. So we did a project that spring, which would have been the spring of 2022, where we did a series of webinars and then wrote together about the people that we talked to in the interviews and our learnings out of those. And it was fun. We really discovered that we were iterative and better. We came out with sort of a better product in the ways that we went about it. And so shortly after that, we spent a couple of days together to outline the book. And then she went back to the publisher and said, I would like to bring in a co-author. What does that look like? And they were amenable to it. And so here we are. And so I became the co-author on this project with her. And could not have been, if we had set out to design a creative process, I don't know if we could have made one any messier, right? because we're very iterative and generative in how we think about this. And so the process very simply became, I can't remember how she put it. I was the plower and she was the digger or something like that. We had metaphors for everything. But the plow was, okay, here's the outline. Let's get the content chunks together that need to be part of this first chapter, second chapter, on and on. And that was really my job. And so I was pulling together, here's a resource we want to, I was writing, sections. I wasn't outlining it as much as I was chunking it. And then it would go to her and she would start to smooth it, right? And begin to create the through line around it. And then she'd send it back to me. Okay, what's missing? And particularly in the early chapters, I don't know how we did it. The early chapters, Deb, we have like 20 and 30 iterations, wow. Right? I mean, we numbered every one. So every time one of us touched it, it got a new number. And I think chapters 1 and 2, we might have 30 or 35. Wow. Versions that got us to the chapter that we were satisfied with. And then of course it went through an editorial process. And it happened over a series of months, very intensely in the spring and early summer of 2023. And then off it went in June. And then you go into, of course, a whole process of edits and refinements and all the things. And it feels like a very long time. I mean, it was June of 2023 when we submitted the draft, and August of 2024 when the book came out. It feels like, what happens? It's like a black box in there. Yeah. Anyway, so that was the process. And along the way, Michaela and I learned a lot. We learned a lot about each other. We learned a lot about ourselves. Writing in this kind of an intimate way reveals a lot about your own foibles as well as your own gifts. And we had to navigate through our own moments of flux as well, which we've done. We committed at the beginning that we would love each other at the end. And that was true. I would say there are probably moments in there where we maybe one of us didn't love the other so much for a little bit of time, but that goes with the territory. But that's really, it is doing things like this in relationship that I think is part of navigating life in flux, right? We can't do things alone and without good partners and good collaborators. And from a content perspective, Michaela has done a lot of work at the Dupree Center. They run cohort programs that are designed to help people get unstuck and really think about and navigate a next season of life. Their cohorts are called The Road Back to You, and they've done some iterations on those, some for women, some for people in their third, entering a new season. I ran a cohort program in Pittsburgh for 15 years that was very intense and was really focused on this question of who am I, right? And I get leaders who come to me all the time and they're in a season of great disruption, great flux. And they're like, I don't know what to do. And my answer to them always is, I don't really care about what you do. What I care about is who you are. Ooh. So let's start there. Yeah. Right. Well, and from a human perspective and particularly from a leadership perspective, that's the organizing question, right? Who am I? And how do I want to make my way in the world? And the last thing I'll say is we didn't set out to write this as a leadership book necessarily. We wanted to be practical help to anyone who was going through a season of disruption or change, which I'll talk about in a minute, because the spoiler alert is we're always in one, just so you know. But we found that the book is very compelling to people who are leaders, who work with leaders, who do the kind of work I do in terms of coaching and developing people, because there's a lot of practicality in it, and it translates well into not just individual formation, but also organizational and team formation, which I spend a lot of time doing. So,
no doubt. Well, first of all, I think the reality is that several takeaways. First of all, thank you for the arc of, writing a book, and certainly writing a book with another person is like, it's a meaningful commitment, and you're going to learn stuff about yourself along the way in the process. Also, note to self, when someone asks you to be a thinking partner, don't be surprised if a book pops out. Just throwing that out as like, that can happen. I also really appreciate the notion of, particularly when we're in a state of disruption or a dysregulation, there's a certain orientation to act, to take action, to take action. And we don't always step back and say, at the really core, who am I? And sort of that sense of reflection and identity. And so as we're going to talk a little bit about the book, and in particular, we're going to talk about, if you look at right now, even, in the last year, and we look at the current state of the world. I was at a conference earlier this week, and one of the fellow speakers made the comment that he said, I often say we're living in unprecedented times. And then you said to the audience, like, who among us would like to live in precedented times? I mean,
Right.
your point is so spot on. I think
Yeah.
that when we look at the concept of life in flux and we think of this as a body of work, there's an evergreen quality to it. And I think
Yeah.
in some cases, as a human being, when I keep telling myself that things should be in
Right.
a stasis or in a stability, that's only setting me up for more dysregulation. So I'm
Yeah.
really happy that we're getting to have this point of view. And I'm really happy for our listeners to understand that elevating human flourishing is going to start with that primary question.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
who am I? You can't,
Right.
here's a Lisa Slaytonism, friends, quoting her for sure. You cannot give away what you do not possess.
Amen.
That is one of the like lifelines that you have
That's
instilled
right.
in me in my journey in the 17 years we've been connected and collaborated. So that framing, let's talk about this big picture, and even
Yeah.
the titling of life in flux. And as you think about what it means to be in a perpetual state of, white water, if you want to
Yeah.
use like a rapids imagery, what is so critical as we think about starting with getting the right mindset and that certain state of like, how do I get like comfortable being comfortable? How do I
Yeah.
recognize and accept the current
Yeah.
realities of things?
Yeah. So let's start. We'll start sort of at the beginning of this, and I'll comment that we, as I said in the introductory comments, I love using other people's research and leveraging it, into what I do, and that was true for Michaela and I in this book. There's a guy named Bruce Feiler who wrote a book called Life is in the Transitions.
Mhm.
And this is the follow up to my spoiler alert. Bruce's research he did a longitudinal study of people over the course of 15, 20, 25 years, and to look at what are the states of equilibrium and disequilibrium, if you will, in our lives over time. And what he found was a little not surprising necessarily once you hear it, but it's like, oh really, we go through some kind of a transition in our lives, or we'll call them adult lives, from early 20s to whenever the good Lord takes us home, every 12 to 18 months.
Really?
Yeah.
That's stunning.
And we have what Bruce terms as life quakes, 4 or 5 times, maybe 6 in the course of a lifetime. And
Okay.
he has a whole list of things in his book that I would commend to you of what those life quakes are. But you can imagine, right? It's you move cities, you get married, you get divorced, you lose a spouse, or you lose someone close to you, all the big momentous things. And what he makes the case for is those things are not switch flips, right? It's not like, okay, today I wake up in Pittsburgh, tomorrow I wake up somewhere else, and I just go on, right? There's a whole preparatory season, sometimes that we're aware of, sometimes that we're not. And then there's a whole recovery season. And this is how we build resilience over time. And so if that's true, think about it. If one is happening to us every 12 to 18 months, we're either in it, or it's coming, or we're coming out of it. So this time of precedent, right, that we already know about, might be a week every 18 months based on this research, right? And increasingly that's true. If you look at the pace and speed and intensity of change over the arc of the last 120, since the Industrial Revolution to now, right? It used to be that they said that major technological changes would take 20 years to get into the DNA of a culture, and then over time it's gotten accelerated to the point where it's now almost instantaneous.
Yeah.
Right, that those things are like they're there, and we have so much that we're constantly overwhelmed. And as we were writing the book, we struggled in our for early conversations to kind of find a story that illustrated what we were trying to help people understand. And I've been married to Roger for almost 45 years. And so I know a lot of his stories. And this is one that's come up over and over again. We spend a lot of time in the summer on the coast of Maine. And Roger grew up there from the time he was very young, and loves being on the water and loves boats. And he has told this story so many times, I can tell it by heart. And we used it in the book. And the story goes very simply that he and a couple buddies, the coast of Maine where we are is very rocky. There are lots of islands, and the activities are going out and going into the coves and going to the islands and getting off and exploring. And so he had a couple of his buddies, they were maybe 16 or 17. He had a boat, not a very big boat, 16 or 17 feet. And they had been out for a day, messing around and going to different places and doing whatever 17-year-old boys do, in boats and on water. And it was a beautiful sunny day the whole time. And as they were preparing to think about making their way home, in the blink of an eye, which happens all the time in Maine, a dense fog rolled in. Okay. Right. And if you've ever been in the fog, whether you're walking down the street or trying to drive in it, it's disorienting, right? And you don't know which way you're going. And as Roger tells the story, he said, the impulse, the knee-jerk reaction is to just put the boat in gear, throttle it up and move, right? And because we're like scared, we're reacting to our own fear, our amygdala is hijacked, all those things, right? And he said, I did that for a minute, but then I realized, and because he had spent time on the water and in boats from the time he was very young, he said, what I did next might sound a little weird, but I actually cut the engine. And he said, the reason you do that is because you have to listen. Right. In the fog now, any navigational, and this was, by the way, mid to late 1960s. So no GPS, no iPhone in your hand, no tools. And primary tools back in those days were the navigational charts, which we still carry in our boat to this day, that tell you where all the nooks and crannies are. But when you can't see anything, a chart does you absolutely no good. Right. And so the listening is to listen for some key things. One is other boats. Right? We're 17-foot boat out on the water, and it's a big boat comes along and they don't know you're there, you're in trouble, right? And so their wake could take you over, they could hit you, whatever the consequences might be. But on the ocean, for people who've spent any time there are also their navigation is somewhat sound-based, light and sound-based. So they're lighthouses, but all those lighthouses also have foghorns attached to them. And every foghorn has a distinct sound. And they're bell buoys that mark the channels, and the bell buoys when the water's moving have a distinct sound. And so he's listening for those sounds because he knows them, right? He's familiar with them. And so the move is to cut the engine, listen, and then take an incremental step towards the familiar sound that you think is going to navigate you home, right? And that's what they did. So it's incremental steps. It's stop, cut the engine, listen, and take a step forward. And that's the pattern throughout the whole book, is that the knee jerk is always, and you and I know this because we're both white knucklers. We have a prayer in the book for white knucklers. If you're a praying person, there's a prayer in there for you, because we want to white knuckle. We want to double down. We want to, use our own strength to navigate through, and you can't do it, right? The conditions around you don't allow it. So what does it mean then to stop and listen and pay attention to what's happening around you and then take steps? And he had two buddies in the boat and they're all listening together. And anyway, it's so that's the basic premise of the boat, right? Or the book is, how do we learn to pay attention in a world that's in a constant swirl, in a constant state of flux? And it's funny, Deb, I have used both metaphors. In the fog, the water is not usually rough. It's calm, interestingly. But whitewater is a whole nother metaphor that is very similar, right? And we are navigating whitewater all the time, disruption and uncertainty. And so one of the ways we've developed these navigational skills, and we can dive into those in a minute, all throughout the book too, we have developed what we call the common posture in flux or disruption, and the uncommon posture. And one of the very first ones is the one I just described a little bit, which is, when the unexpected happens, I react, right? Boom, off I go. And the uncommon posture is, when the unexpected happens, I pause and reflect so that I can choose my response, which is different than reaction. And that's a through line. How do we respond instead of react? So that's really the basis for this book, knowing that we're always coming in, going out of, or in some season of transition and disruption. Some of them are small, some of them are big, some of them take more time. And the work is to understand who you are in the midst of that. That's the grounding work, right? If I'm taking my cues from everybody around me, I could be going in 10 different directions, and that produces chaos, and that's not good for anybody.
No. I think, and so much of our commitment to this podcast is to be able to take stories and sort of applications and in a very practical way, give our audience a way to take an action. So that the ability to see things. I love this metaphor in the sense of fog. When you have told this story and I get the sense that it's almost claustrophobic
Oh,
in that experience when
yeah,
you are so disoriented, but it is not the human instinct to throttle back to access and to
right,
listen and to engage. And I'm imagining when you think about blind spots, that common, the common postures and the uncommon postures, I think is a really important thing for people to take inventory of. And I'm going to ask for the balance of our conversation. If people are listening right now, like, where are you in the transition? As you said, are you getting ready for one? Are you
yeah,
in the height of it, or are you recently out of it? And then you're going to be on that next ramp. If you look at Bruce's research, I think thinking about where do people need to cut the engine right now? I mean, today,
right, yeah,
where is it that they need to take stock and to listen in a way that allows us to then draw upon that deep, deep understanding and knowing. And then I love the idea that while we may feel that we are surrounded in fog, that the water is usually calm. We're responding or reacting,
right,
I should say, not responding.
right,
We're reacting.
yeah,
In some cases, we're creating our own white water. Is that a fair assumption? Is that
that's right,
even
yeah.
so even in that space? So is there any other blind spots? So if somebody is now taking stock of like where they are on that arc of a transition or a change, what are some of the blind spots that we should be paying really close attention to that really disconnect us from the experience of our own flourishing?
Yeah, in the early chapters in the book, we outline the what sort of 5 shifts that we hope the book helps people make, and I think for each of us, at least one of these is a blind spot or a place where you get hung up. And I won't go into a lot of detail around them for this moment, but the reaction is all often to panic, right? And the response, the shift, is to pause. So, do you find yourself when something comes at you that's unexpected or disruptive, panicking, right? And reacting and knee jerking, right? And the shift is to really learn to pause and okay, pay attention. Okay, what's going on? How do I make sense of this? And there's like neuroscience behind this and
Yeah.
physiological, like you can take 3 deep breaths in a moment of panic and restore oxygen to your brain that allows you to think more clearly,
Okay.
right? it's
Good.
it's that kind of a simple practice. It often produces anxiety, right? And anxiety gets a bad rap. I think there is a good kind of anxiety. And now don't hear me talking about people with true anxiety disorders. I have a kiddo who's got an anxiety disorder. It's a very different thing.
Right.
But we get anxious about things and then we want to get rid of the anxiety. And so we self comfort or soothe or binge watch or do whatever it is that we do. But anxiety can be a producer of forward momentum if we understand it well. And we want to move to anticipation, like something's happening here. What's possible? What might be possible, right? We're also, and this, we could have a whole podcast around this, maybe you will with someone. We're so distracted, right? Everything is a distraction, from the phone in the morning to email dings to all the things. That we live in a distracted world. And so what does it mean to learn to really become present first and foremost with yourself, right? Become present to myself so that I can be present for others. And then a big one for us is moving from a fear-based mindset to a mindset of courage, right? And courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the willingness to take action in the face of fear. And the courage, the word courage comes from the word core, which is heart. So it starts with, courage comes from the situation of your heart, which is the inner work we talk about here. And then finally, moving from knowledge to wisdom, we are great accumulators of information. Information is not wisdom. Experience is not wisdom, really. We can have experiences, but they don't become wisdom for us unless we can learn from them. And so how do we take those accrued experiences over time and learn from them and begin to say, okay, I've been here before. What does experience and wisdom tell me? Do I move? Do I stay? Do I step out? So those are the shifts that we're really inviting people to begin to make through the navigational skills. And the very first step of the whole journey is waking up.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a perfect transition. So first of all, you will be coming back to the podcast to talk about those things in more detail. So I'm
Okay.
just putting that out there. And so now that I've put it out there for our audience, it's going to be
We're
hard for you to
committed.
say no. It's hard for you to say no.
No, I would never say no to you. You
Okay,
know that.
cool. So let's then talk about the navigational skills. And I know for purposes of today, we're going to dive into a few of them, but
Yeah.
I love that everything that you outline, and you've just given us a good sense of it is this practicalities and this ability to see
Right.
things and make shifts. And the navigational skills for life in flux really are just that. It's like an outline of really concrete. Once you've shifted into that, you've done the inner work, you've done the grounding, you've got your mindset in those shifts, then is now you can begin to take those more positive, directed, concrete actions that start to
Right.
produce different outcomes that, theoretically are going to produce more fruit, more value,
Hmm.
even in the space of these uncertainties. So tell us a little bit about, the first one is the wake up. And then I've got
Yeah.
two favorites that I want you to dig in a little bit deeper and selfishly because
Yeah.
it's meaningful to, I think, my own journey and trying to think about how do I be a leader that's elevating human flourishing through this platform. But I also know that our audience, again, this idea that you can do something meaningful and productive, even in this space when things feel like they're completely out of control.
That's right.
I think there's a lot to be gained. So tell us about wake up. What when we're waking up?
Yeah, waking up is there's a lot of research actually being done about this idea of moving to, what the social scientists call a more elevated state of consciousness, right? And awareness of what's going on around us. And I think, part of our own growth and learning journey as human beings is that we do have these wake up moments, right? And the wake up comes primarily for two reasons. The first one is possibility. You've reached a certain point in your work, in your life, in whatever the circumstance or the environment is, and you recognize that something more is possible, something different is possible. You can kind of see the hazy horizon out there in the fog, that there's a thing out there. It's like, oh, I could go there, right? You don't know how to get there. Right.
Mhm.
So that's a wake up to say, okay, I need help. I can't do this by myself. My typical, doubling down and working harder, is not going to get me there. Right. Although lots of people still do that. And so that's one reason. The more common reason, and certainly the reason that people come to me and that I work with people all the time, both individually and organizations, is there's pain.
Yeah.
Something hard has happened, right? And whether, and a lot of it for people in the West, in Western culture, it has to do with job and identity,
Yeah.
right? And we've put our identity in the things that we do and have never really paid attention to who we are. And so when the thing we do gets shifted or disrupted or goes away, we're lost. We've lost our sense of identity and groundedness because that's what we relied on. And it can be as much for an empty nest mom who's devoted her whole life to raising children and now they're gone and don't need her in the same ways, which, by the way, I think is a myth. You have young adult children too. They never go away. They're there forever. But it is a different thing when they're physically out of the house and all of a sudden it's like, okay, I'm not doing all those things daily anymore. Who am I in the midst of this? You've built a career and it gets pulled out from under you. I mean, all of those kinds of disruptions are wake ups.
Yeah.
And then we have to decide how we want to respond to the wake up. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. One of the skills you pointed to that we'll dive into a little bit in more detail that comes immediately after waking up is check your speed. Right. And if you remember back to what happens when you're in the fog, you cut your engine and you stop. Right. And the interesting thing about this chapter is in our original outline, this chapter was closer to the end. It was like, okay, we get through all the other work and then we remind people that they have to slow down. And as we started writing and we were putting the chapters together, we moved a couple around and this was one of them. And Michaela and I both, I can't remember who said it first. I think it was her that said, the more I'm reading this and going through it and looking at what we're moving around, within chapters, I think check your speed has to come sooner.
Yes.
And we moved it. So it's now the second skill after waking up. And it really is learning to resist. And the way we phrase it in the book is the near constant external pressure to move fast so that I can do the slow, deep work that life in flux requires. Right.
I,
This work is not a quick fix.
yeah.
There is no easy button, and it does take time. When I work with a coaching client who's going through, I call it vocational coaching or vocational stewardship work. And I use the word vocation intentionally, which we can talk about a little later if there's time. But it's recognizing that I have to pay attention to who I am, and I do it over a 6 to 9 month period with people.
Mhm.
I don't do hourly coaching. I don't do a 6 week gig to see if we can fix your thing, right? There are great coaches out there who do that,
Yeah.
and I have a whole list of them that I can send you to, but that's not my work. My work is really, if you want to do this in this season, we're going to dive in, and I'm going to force you to go slow because that's the process. And if people resist it like crazy. Well, what's next? What am I doing? Where's my homework? What? Yeah, like just sit with what we've just learned and begin to marinate in it, if you will, a little bit. It's hard to slow down. The world doesn't encourage it. In fact, it rewards speed, right? It rewards faster. Oh, look, she responded to my text in 39 seconds. Like, you win the text response award for the day. Great. What did that get you? You know? And so the people I increasingly want to be around most are the people who are slower and more thoughtful and more reflective. I need that in my life. My impulse, I'm very future oriented, as I know you are. I'm very oriented to move towards the future, to initiate things, get things going. And in this season, this last 10 years really for me has been around learning to not initiate and to just pay attention and see what's emerging. And that's a check your speed posture, right? That's how we stay in the check your speed mode.
Well, so what comes to mind, and now I'm recognizing as we were preparing for this conversation, the two skills I picked are, so not surprisingly, I'm having a revelation, perhaps the two skills that I need to revisit in my own sort of present state. And I can also validate this idea of the long work that you do with clients, having been in multiple
Yeah.
seasons of those, sort of 6 to 9 months. There is something really transformational. And I just want to say with a high degree of confidence, you are such an important person and input to
Mm.
the quality of the life that I get to enjoy today. So I
Mm.
want to say thank
Well,
you for
I
that.
love you.
And
So
I think
thank
that
you.
is so profound in the way you've described it. And I want to make sure our audience understands that the
Yeah.
intention behind what you're sharing. One additional navigational skill, which again, hello mirror, I'm now looking in it, is this idea of embrace the unfigure outable. I
Mm.
love when people go there and make up words that just speak to my heart, and
Yeah.
the unfigure outable. And I mean, I don't know that it's in spell check anywhere, but this idea that there is simply the validation that there are some things that in a particular moment in time, are they just simply don't make sense. And if I can, which may seem a little non sequitur, but I really want you to talk about this skill. One of the most impactful songs that I've ever had in my own experience is when Garth Brooks sang his song, Unanswered Prayers.
Mm.
This idea that in the moments of embracing the unfigure outable things, when we're convinced that there isn't an answer or there isn't going to be a path forward, there is something powerful about
Yeah.
having the capacities to hold that. And so, can you say a little bit about, how does that particular skill of embracing things that are just simply not figure outable in the moment, how does that lead to more flourishing?
Yeah. It's a favorite word. We did make it up. And you have to add it to your dictionary if you're going to try and type it multiple times. And I typed it a million times, and still do. And I'm counting my claim to fame day is going to be when Merriam-Webster adds it to the dictionary.
There you
That,
go.
when how they add new words every year. Well, I want our word to get added. I think it comes from in my own study and learning around understanding adaptive leadership and complex systems is where a lot of this comes from. And we as particularly people in the work in the business world, in the workplace, we create a lot of our value over time by being great problem solvers, right? And problem solving is definitely a powerful skill to have. And not everything is a problem that can be solved, right? And so the unfigure outable is the moment when we can't solve it. And we come to that place where, and I've been in these rooms, and I'm sure you have too, with a group of leaders or with an individual, or, where someone pounds their fist and throws up their hands and says, I don't know what to do. We got no idea what to do here. And if I'm in that room in my capacity as a consultant and an advisor, my answer is perfect. Now the real work can begin, right? And we have to release what we think we know in order to be prepared to learn, right? And be willing to stay in that space of not knowing, which is very uncomfortable for most of us who have built our reputations and our own sense of identity around knowing things and being, a particular kind of expert in a field. And I am not opposed to expertise, do not hear that, but not everybody knows everything. No one knows everything for sure. Adam Grant wrote a book that came out a couple of years ago called Think Again, which might be one of my faves. And he's really inviting us into this space of recognizing when we have to get rid of what we have learned to unlearn and relearn, right? And so that's the process. It's not just learning and relearning. You've got to unlearn. You've got to go to that space of not knowing and be very uncomfortable there. The metaphor I often use, and you've heard this, Deb, is what happens when the caterpillar goes into the chrysalis before it becomes a butterfly. And that chrysalis space is a space, it's a black box. The researchers and scientists are now slowly beginning to understand what happens in there through the use of technologies like MRI and imaging and all that. And they can see that things from the caterpillar go away in order for new things to emerge for the butterfly to form. So we can't carry through with us the baggage that got us to where we are. We have to let it go and then be willing to relearn some things, to unlearn those things and relearn. And problem solving is one of them. And there is a place for problem solving. Like, you don't need to cross it off your resume. It's still a valuable skill. But increasingly in the world we live in, which I put in the category of complex adaptive worlds, we don't know. And so the posture then becomes one of curiosity. How do we learn? How do we ask questions? How do we do small experiments? How do we try some things and see what's happening out there? How do we ask the right questions? Because there's no root cause for a complex issue, right? In the way that there is for a problem to be solved. It's not just a bigger math problem, right? There's no one root cause. And so we have to pay attention to all the moving parts of the system that are, enmeshed and entwined together. And to me, this is the adaptive skill that leaders have to learn if they're going to make their way in the world that we're currently living in, that's getting only more chaotic and intense and swirly and foggy and white watery. I mean, let's throw all the analogies in there, right? It's not going to get better. And I don't mean that to be a doom and gloomer. I just know it's just a reality. So how do we then learn in that space and invite people to be with us?
Yeah.
So Deb, I don't know what to do. What are you seeing? And we can have a dialogue around it. And you're not coming to me with answers. My role is often not. I always have a lot of answers, but most of them are not great. So it's better to ask the questions and say, okay, here's what I'm seeing. Let's go back and forth around this. And we see what emerges. And my role is to hold the space, to allow someone the freedom to do that, right? And I think not knowing and being willing to acknowledge not knowing is the superpower for leaders as we enter this world that we're coming into, that we're in. We're already there. It's happening.
It's happening. So I think there's two things as we transition to some summaries and takeaways. I really so appreciate the exclamation point on embrace the unfigureoutable as really being a cornerstone navigational skill.
Yeah.
And what I really appreciate, even your analogy, and it just occurred to me, I'm absorbing this discussion in a lot of ways through the lens of self and how to think about elevating the human experience through the lens of, like, how do I need to get right with myself and my own mindset as a leader, as a mother, as a wife, as a person who lives in community. What does that look like? But you just said something else that I think is super important. And I'd love for us to dig deeper when we connect again, is this idea of, and when you are the coach or the leader, how do we take this navigational skill and create space or hold space so that people have the capacities to embrace the unfigureoutable? My brain just went off. So yeah, you have something else to say. So please.
No, I just agree. I think there's, and how do we, I do it professionally. You do it professionally in many ways as well. And how do we do it for one another, right? I mean, it's not just a professional skill to acquire, it's how to be in relationship with other people in a healthy way.
No doubt. Which is, I think, a good, as we, think about, I like that the way you end the book is this concept of being at home in Flux. And,
Yeah,
again, when we go on these journeys for self-improvement or self-care or self-realization, again, the self really is a misnomer because it
hmm,
is not an individual action, and is the white knuckler, as
right,
we often are, that this idea of being at home isn't to be at home by yourself. It's sort of in that space of
right,
where you go, so goes home. When you've seen people grow and
yeah.
you really flourish in taking on the mindset shift, the grounding, this ability to apply those navigational skills, what are some of the practical things that people can take from this and maybe feel deeply motivated to go deeper to really understand the full body of the work that you've created?
Yeah.
But first thing,
So I'll point back to the chapter just before the last chapter, which is stay in your headlights,
yeah,
which might be my favorite chapter. And because the work I do is, and you're a demonstration and case study for this, is learning to know who you are for the sake of constraint, for the sake of being able to say no to the things that are not yours to do. Right. And we live in a world that pressures us, and we're performance and productivity oriented, and the world rewards that, right? And so when someone comes to you and says, Deb, this thing, we're going to do it and you'd be great, the human response is, oh, they love me, they're affirming me, they want me to do this thing. And then you kind of get sucked in to say yes without realizing what it's going to take, right? And what the implications of it are for all the other things you've already said yes to. And so the work is really learning how to live within the constraints, in the headlights of who you're made to be, and your part in everything. We don't, one of the old Clifton Strength Finder sayings is there's no such thing as a well-rounded team or a well-rounded leader, only a well-rounded team, right? And so we don't have to be all things to all people. We have to be the best of who we've been created to be, to bring that forth into the world for the sake of others. And when we do that, we can operate from a place of what's often referred to as non-anxiety, right? A non-anxious presence, the calm presence in the room when everything is swirling, because we're confident, not that we have all the answers, but that we can be present to others, and we can guide space if we need to, and help people settle and become present to themselves and to one another as well. And that's where the new emerges. That's where innovation occurs. That's where the excitement and the energy is. But it's not quick or fast. It's messy, and it comes from this place of deep groundedness that only can come from understanding who you are, what it means to be called to a particular place in a particular time, and how you steward well the gifts that you've been given for the sake of others. And that's being at home in Flux,
I
right?
love it. Well, I am beyond grateful that you've given this little mini masterclass
Yeah,
on how we can continue to promote and supercharge the mission of the HX Collective, which is to
yeah.
elevate human flourishing. And, as we wrap, I would ask if there are any closing thoughts or words of encouragement. And I want to say confidently, I can't wait to
Yeah.
pick up our conversation and dig deeper.
Yeah. I'll close with this. There's a Hebrew word that is I'm very fond of. There are a couple of Hebrew words, but one of them is the word shalom, which we're often very familiar with. And it translates often to the word peace, right? Which is a very anemic and impoverished translation. Shalom really means flourishing. It means the webbing together of all things the way they were intended to be, but people and systems and societies and cultures and all of that. And human flourishing comes about when each of us individually is willing to do the work to be in relationship with others in a healthy way for the sake of others and for the sake of the things we're called to do together, whether it's a work project or a community project or whatever it is. So if I bring my gifts and you bring your gifts, we're better together. And I don't have to do what you do or be you, and you don't have to do what I do or be me. And so human flourishing comes about when we are able to let go of our egos and embrace what theologians and philosophers often call self-forgetfulness, right? I don't think highly of myself. I don't think lowly of myself. I just don't think of myself. I'm here to participate, and I'm comfortable and confident in what I can bring, and comfortable and confident in what's not mine to do, right? And so that's what produces flourishing over time. And you've seen this they're not often, they're not common, but in teams and in families and in places of community where this is happening. And it's messy and it's hard, right? But it's worth it. It's worthy work, because it does in the end produce flourishing for all of us. And to me, that's what we're here for.
Well, on that note, I say, Lisa Slayton, shalom. Thank
Shalom,
you.
baby. I'm with
Shalom.
you.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. I can't wait for our next conversation. We'll add in the show notes all the book references that Lisa has given us, and I'll make sure that you all need to pick up your copy, Life in Flux. What a wonderful gift you've given us of your time, and thank you so much to you and Michaela for this great body of work. We'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, Deb.
Thanks for being here. If today's conversation sparked something in you, we hope you'll carry it forward with curiosity, compassion, and courage. Subscribe to the show, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs it. Until next time, keep exploring what it means to be fully human.